there was anything wrong with the pregnancy, you would know. And so I get to the hospital, and by that point, I'm crashing, and they're running around doing all these things, and then everything went black. And then I heard this voice, just like this kind of curious voice, and said, "Did I just die?"
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Melinda Peterson to the show. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me on today. And I have to say, your work is incredible. I really appreciate grief work, because there's so much grief that's going to enter our lives, whether we want it to or not. And to have somebody who can bring us through that transition and work with it in the way that can provide us that loving community is so, so important. So I appreciate what you do. And I also have to share that this is a particularly special day because it's been 11 years since my near-death experience. So
Wow.
it's probably a high energy day, and I'm just so honored to be here.
And even before we hit record, we felt that, didn't we? It was
Yes,
like,
yes.
woo, yes, there's a lot of energy. So and it's interesting because we had this scheduled for another day, and
Mhm.
then it was rescheduled and it ended up today. So that's pretty remarkable. So I'm really appreciative of you being here and sharing, and especially within this energetic space that is this day. So thank you so much. And I loved what you said about the grief process being a period of transition. That's a beautiful way of seeing that and looking at that. Before we get started into your story, because I know everyone's anxious to hear your story, um, tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Sure. Yeah, I with by title, I am a registered nurse. I'm an intuitive healer, also known as like a health intuitive. Really kind of open-ended how that looks. And I also am an environmental scientist before I had my near-death experience and became a nurse. And I live in Colorado. I have a beautiful 3.5-year-old daughter who came to me through the process of adoption. And I love to drink iced tea. I love to stand up paddleboard. I love to practice yoga. That's a big part of my life. And I just love to enjoy like the outdoors and all the gifts that nature has to bring us. And what else? I'm just a naturally curious person, but I will say, like, since I had my near death experience, that curiosity has just fully blossomed. And so I just love to explore all of the things.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, that's really interesting. Those are a lot of varied experiences. So this will be fun to explore those experiences that you've had. So take us back to what life was like, just a little bit of a snapshot of what life was like before your near-death experience.
Mm. Yeah, so I was entering or ending my second trimester pregnancy and entering my third trimester pregnancy. I had also been offered a dream job, and it would require moving states back to Colorado, which we were both overjoyed about. This was going to be our first child. And so we moved across states very carefully at the advisement of our doctor, saying it was okay. And I didn't lift a finger, started a new job, did all the things. And I was just so happy to start a family here. I was feeling grounded. I was working in the environmental science field. I just was feeling like this is where I need to be. And I was working on setting up my appointments for seeing the new OBGYNs here. And but throughout that process, like I had started to ask some questions too about my pregnancy, which ends up leading to what happens. So I'll kind of like stop there, but I'll just say like also another piece of it was I believed I had kind of like more of a scientific spiritual belief in that, we go back into the earth, we become, flower food, or we become a tree, or something beautiful happens to us. But I didn't really think that our spirit continued on. I didn't know that there was a consciousness after death. I was a cautious skeptic, I guess you could say, but also a believer in like the beauty of the beauty of the passing, just becoming we are part of this nature, we're part of this process. But that was what I believed was that was kind of it for a consciousness. So
Wow.
that's where kind of my beliefs were held. Yes.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so then what happened
Mhm.
that changed everything?
Yeah. Well, I think this other part of my story is really really key because um I when I was a little kid, I was really really curious about my body. I was like really interested in my hands, and that could carry my stuffed animals and my books and do all these things for me. And as I grew up older, being a woman and especially like just exploring society in the way that we do it growing up as girls, I started to disconnect from my body. I started to feel like it was something I needed to change, something that needed to act a certain way, look a certain way. And I just started to become more and more disconnected to my body. Now,
Mm,
this is relevant because when I became pregnant, it was sort of like I was forced to get to know my body again because I was going to all these doctor's appointments, right? I was like, somebody was growing inside of me, and I just was like, okay, so here I am getting to know my body again. And, I was trained in a scientific field, but yet I knew so little about medical things. I knew so little about how my body worked, what this pregnancy was doing. Um, and because of that, I missed some really key signals that were happening in my body early on.
mm,
And it really wasn't until my near death experience when I was told so many things, but one of the key messages being that the wisdom is in our body and we can express consciousness through it in this human experience. That was the point where I started to actually come back and connect to my body through that process of healing. But the key here is that I just really I didn't understand the things that were wrong about my pregnancy. And when I tried to advocate for myself, I felt very lost in the medical system because I didn't really know how to say what was happening. And some of those things looked like I would feel movement on one side, but I particularly just on one side, and my pregnancy was kind of lopsided. And I would bring those up to my previous doctors before I moved, and they would just say, it's normal baby movement, it's okay, and I brought it up to my doctors here, and I was scheduled to have an appointment, and they were taking me seriously, and they said, we're going to look into this because it sounds a little strange to us. So I was like, okay, finally somebody's looking into this, somebody's going to understand. But that appointment was scheduled for the Friday, and my near death experience was Thursday.
wow. Wow. So what happened?
So I had a pretty normal day, got up, went to work, and I had a lunch. I had a sandwich, which is what I ended up blaming as for why I wasn't feeling well. And I immediately started having indigestion symptoms, or what I thought was indigestion symptoms.
Hmm.
That then progressed throughout the day. What was actually happening was internal bleeding. But I was
Wow.
so, again, like kind of just disconnected from my body that I kept just saying, you can power through this, or I blamed the sandwich. Like there's all these things, right, that I felt like was my fault. And there was a lot of shame involved in that. So my theory was just to power through and to just, go to bed or go to sleep and this will get better. But the pain was increasingly getting worse. And my husband was, he's like, this isn't, we gotta take you to the hospital. And so he called an ambulance. And by that point I was very sick, hyperventilating, um, vomiting, and just was really confused as to why I was feeling so sick.
That had
And
to
then I
be so scary.
yeah, it was very scary. And since we had just moved here, everyone was out of their houses and on the street and wondering what was going on, and
Uh,
looking at the ambulance and trying to figure out who we were, right? And like what was going on. But we did have some incredible neighbors who stepped up, and one of them took our 2-year-old dog into their home and said, we'll take care of your dog. His name was Zeus. We'll take care of Zeus for as long as we need to. And
wow.
the kindness of people.
Yeah, there really are angels on earth.
They really are. They really are. So I was taken to the hospital. At this point, I was just really confused as to what was going on. Didn't know it was internal bleeding. My cervix was still closed. Sorry if that's TMI, but my cervix was still closed. I didn't, so all I thought was if there was anything wrong with the pregnancy, you would know. And so I get to the hospital, and by that point I'm crashing, and they're running around doing all these things. Um, and then everything went black.
Wow.
And it was just black and silent. And I have no idea how long that was. You really don't have any concept of time on the other side because it's nonlinear. And then I heard this voice, just like this kind of curious voice, and it said, "Did I just die?"
Mm,
And that was the point where I started experiencing where it was like I was experiencing sound again. I could hear some of the things that were going on in the hospital. I was hearing names of doctors, and doctors that only took care of me that night, but later on in the future, I asked my husband, like, did this doctor take care of me? And he's like, I don't remember. I was in so much, stress. But I would look through my charts and I found out that yes, that was the person. I was hearing this, I was watching it, right?
so
Happen.
you were hearing it and watching?
Yes, I started to see things in the room. That's
Okay.
how it started for me. So, I was hearing names, I was hearing them talking, I didn't really know. I don't think that I consciously knew right then that the baby wasn't alive anymore. There was like still this uncertainty about
Yeah.
what was happening. And um I started seeing things in the room, and I started like, kind of noticing like medical things when they wheeled in ultrasounds, things like that. But I really didn't, I just was kind of like witnessing it and not really fully understanding it.
So did you have like a visual perspective? Like, for example, your body's laying in the on the gurney or, on the bed, and what is your conscious perspective as you're seeing and hearing things? Because a lot of times people talk about like seeing from above, or
Hmm.
did it feel like that to you, or was it a little different than that?
Not exactly. It felt really more like everything was on the sides at this point.
Okay. Okay.
So it kind of felt like I could see like we would in our awake consciousness, but I was not awake.
Gotcha.
So it was like, starting to see things, but then I started feeling that rising feeling, and
Okay.
I started noticing, and I was so much in awe of I was seeing from the rising, see, entering this brilliant phase of light. And I
Wow.
was so much in awe, and I was feeling this call to just keep going that I like kind of no longer cared, to be honest, with what was going on to my body. And so it was that point, I think, where the visual consciousness really transitioned for me. And I just started going into this gorgeous light. And it looked very much like images that we've seen from our satellites and from,
Mm.
like really looking at like deep space imagery or birth of stars, or that's what it looked like. It just looked, and this was even before, I think, long before some of the current, images from NASA have come out. And it was so loving, so warm, so welcoming. And I just felt like, all right, here I go. I'm going to release, I'm going to surrender to what this is.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And so that voice that said, did I die? Did we die?
Yeah.
That was kind of your internal voice. And so at that point, were you conscious that you had died? Or was it just like you're in this light and you're just experiencing this and there's not really a connection to that piece of it?
There wasn't really a connection to that piece of it. It just was sort of, yeah, it just was all linked to the experience. It may have been an internal voice, but what is interesting is like there was that like moment of blackness that happened where everything just kind of like like a computer is fried and it just, everything kind of deactivates, right?
Mm,
And then I heard the voice. So I sometimes I've looked back at that and I've gone, was that one of my like my consciousness, my spirit being, or was that like me as I'm showing up here in this human body? I don't really know. But it definitely was and why I said with linking grief to a transitionary process is like we have a transitionary process into death, and also our human beings on and here on the earth have a transitional process and feeling into losing that person, right?
mm,
And so I think this was really a transitory period for me where it's like I was sort of in this space of like, being somewhat here and then somewhat on the other side. But then when I was sent into this light experience, it was so very, very clear. Oh, I've never seen this before. I don't know what this is. I think this is it.
mm, mm. And then what happened?
So then I was immediately greeted by a spirit guide who showed up to me um as kind of like a neon outline of purple light, and but very gorgeous, like just again like just outside of our sensory experience here in this human body. And it's really, really hard to describe, which is probably something you've heard from other experiencers. And he just gave me all this love. He gave me this gift of love just telepathically and helped me feel safe and made me feel loved. And at this point, really, it was kind of me having this experience, and there wasn't that connection necessarily with my baby. Um, and it just kind of felt like I was having the experience, and I wasn't really aware of where he was yet.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes into it a little bit later, at least as far as I can tell on the linear time, or trying to put linear time on a non-linear time experience, right? But yeah, so this spirit guide, and I've really thought a lot about, because I was having this like experience of seeing him as a being of light, but also understanding that I know this person, and
Mm,
there's two and what I there's two beings that really come to mind, that of who that being was. One is my uncle Michael, who died before I was ever able to meet him. So yeah, I think it was 8 years before I was born, he passed, and he passed young, and he had a terminal illness. So that was his experience. But also, like, he had an appearance a lot like Jesus. He
mm,
had like a beard, and he had, long hair, and so there's also this like perspective of like it was Jesus and Uncle Mike. Like there was like this merging of like whoever this being was kind of like it just kind of felt like both, right? Like that we become such a one consciousness, right? That it's showing up as Uncle Mike just to like let me know, like here I am, I'm familiar, I'm part of your family, but also like Jesus is a figure as well, a spirit guide on the other side. And so my interpretation of that is what you feel like is most comfortable with in this life is who is going to show up for you on the other side. So if you think or if you believe that that spirit guide and you strongly, believe in Jesus being your spirit guide, then that's probably who it will appear for you, right, at this experience. Now, I have heard other people share that, they didn't necessarily believe in Jesus and also saw Jesus. So it's really interesting to me as I kind of unpack this and who this guide was. But all I know is that this guide was just pure love, pure safety. You're here, you can relax, you can be in this true presence. And that was such a special moment to know, to feel safe, to know that no matter what is happening to me, to my body, to my consciousness, that it's okay and that I'm feeling loved.
Mm, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Did your guide share messages or I mean, obviously just that feeling of warmth and love and safety. I love
Mhm.
that you shared that the safety, that is and isn't that a part of love? When we feel truly loved, we feel safe. So I
Mhm.
love that.
Yes. Yeah, and other spirit guides started coming into the appearance kind of similarly. And there were also spirit pets too, as well. And they just all kind of they had their outline i- appearance, but mainly just I think it was mainly for me to understand who they were. But I also telepathically knew. It's almost like this light form kind of took identities just for a moment for me to kind of understand, right? Coming out of this human experience, it could be jarring, right, to see it differently. And so they show up that way, but again, they're all one, and that's what the spirit guide told me. We're here, we're love, we're safety. We're also all one. All roads lead to one. You are home. Welcome. You know,
Mhm.
and so I kept continuing down this path of life or light. And I started to notice that my senses from the human experience, I was no longer feeling pain. I was no longer feeling cold. I was no longer feeling really anything into my body. The last piece of sort of the human experience that I was perceiving was hearing. And that was kind of the first one that came into being as well when I started to go through this experience. So every once in a while, I'd kind of come out of this experience and I'd hear something on the ground, like doctors talking, or my family coming by my side, or my husband crying, or something going on. And I couldn't really quite make sense of it at this point. I was just kind of in so much awe and reverence for this experience. And it was there. And then every once in a while, I would hear a prayer, and that would show up as light. And so
Mhm.
those were like coming in as light, and they were coming in as orange light. And I could hear those pretty clear as day. And I started to think, well, wow, I'm wanted, I'm cared about, I'm loved. And it kind of merged into that overall feeling of love on the other side. But it didn't necessarily there was no choice to it. It was just sort of like this is what it is. There was no like yearning for me to be back there. There was a little bit of like, you know, or there was a lot, I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot of feeling like if this continues, I'm fine with that. And but there was a clear message that this human experience is so important. It's so important for us as spiritual beings. Because when we come back into a human experience, when we incarnate into a human experience, we're trying to spread this message of love here on earth, right? And we need to live out the time that we are sort of that we are given so that we can help trying to get this message of love out. And then what happens is we become humans and it's messy, right? We have other people's experiences. There's trauma, there's grief, there's sadness, there's loneliness, there's hunger, there's all these things, these very human, real experiences that we have as a society. And then it starts getting more and more challenging for us to get back to that place, right? But everyone has their own time, and it's sort of like that is a gift for us to come and try to spread this message of love. And it was kind of at that point where I was told, you don't have a choice, you're going back. And the way that I have understood this, because people lose people at so many ages, and Julie, you've lost children at young ages, and there's no fairness to that, and that shouldn't be. And so for me, I'm not special. It's just really this bonus time that I'm experiencing, which isn't really bonus time. It just was something that was meant to be
Right.
in, yeah, in this
It wasn't
experience.
your time to go. And sometimes it's our time to go when we're young because yeah, we can't totally comprehend it from this vantage point. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I am not special, right? I don't see that as being special. It just is what it is, because certainly there is no reason why children, we should lose our children, right? That is not a normal order of things, yet it happens. And so that's me coming back from this is not to say that I am more special than your children, right? Because your children are very
absolutely.
special and their lives are very special. And so sometimes I know that this is something that I have dealt with in my own grief too, and losing my son. It's, well, why not? Right? Why don't we just keep going together? You know? And so, but I'm not special. I'm just back here to be in it and to the human experience, right?
And to
Um,
bring that light and that love back with you as a messenger for sure.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that.
Thank you. So, um, so at this point, when I found out I do not have a choice, I'm going back. And there were two things that came in. One of them was the message of the wisdom is in your body, and you're going to come back to a very, very sick body, because at this point, all of my organs had gone into failure,
Wow.
and I had less than 1% chance to survive.
Wow.
So my guides told me, you're going to come back to a very, very sick body. What I want you to focus on is that the wisdom is in the body. And as you go through this healing process, every single time something comes back that starts to work better than it did before, you're going to see the spirituality in that. You're going to see the love experience through that. You're going to explore what that means from a consciousness level now that you have this experience on the other side. And so, okay. And then my baby was brought to me.
Mm,
And his name is Oak.
mm.
And we didn't want to find out his sex before he was born. We wanted to be surprised. And so, but we wanted to refer to the pregnancy as something. And so we started referring to the pregnancy as Oak. under referring to the oak trees under which we were married by the banks of Oak Creek in Sedona, Arizona. And we were like, yes, he's oak. So while this was going on in my body, they had delivered him. They brought him to me, and we were able to take some pictures through some wonderful organizations called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. And because these are the only pictures we're ever going to have of our child. And so that was happening to my body and around my body. And then he came to me in the near death experience. And I was able to hold him and I was able to love on him. And we were in this experience together. And then my spirit guide said to me, it's it's time for you to separate. And here's what is going to happen. I am going to provide him a hammock in your heart so that when your heart beats, you will feel him rocking in your heart.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful. Hmm. Yeah. I'm I don't want to move too far ahead, but I'm just so curious about how you integrated all this because that's a lot. You're not only experiencing physical distress, less than a 1% chance of living. You've lost your son and you've had this remarkable experience on the other side where where you've experienced this extraordinary love that's so hard for us to comprehend here, where you've experienced that warmth, where you've experienced that safety. Um, but yeah, just wherever you want to take us from there, share what uh, what was your next experience?
Mm. Yeah, so earlier on I mentioned being little and really like being in awe of my hands and holding books and holding stuffed animals. When I came back to my body, the first thing I did was move my hands
Mm.
and wiggle my fingers. And I distinctly remember like holding my hands out, just like, give me what I need, right? Let me surrender to what this experience is going to look like because I had that beautiful message from it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging. Learn from it, share from it. Let
Mm.
it be this like awakening into spirituality and love that you received on the other side. Let that process awaken you to more of that. And so I moved my hands and I just surrendered my hands. And I still had a ventilator on. I still had a tube in my throat. And I was trying to speak. And they said, you can't speak, so you can try to write. And I took a marker in my hand and, I was trying to ask. It was strange because I was almost like I was asking for oak. And I was
Mm.
trying to write it out and I just couldn't. The pen fell out of my hand, the board fell out of my hand, and I just, again, just, okay, here we are. And then I had a kind nurse say to me, we have pictures. We know what oak looks like. Brian got to hold him, my husband. He's here with us. We care about him. And thank goodness, because I have heard so many experiences where in pregnancy loss where they've had a terrible experience in the hospital. And I feel just very fortunate I was where I was exactly meant to be.
Mm.
And because grieving a pregnancy loss is it's a particular kind of challenge in the fact that like there's a lot of there can be experiences where people say things to you like, oh, you can just have another, or it was early on, or you never knew this child, or and first of all, I cannot physically have another because of the trauma. that I experienced with the uterine rupture. So when people would say that to me, it would be especially hurtful.
Yeah.
And it's also challenging too when other pregnant people are around you and they're trying to hide it or like keep it from you in some way, and you're like, I feel worse when you do that, right?
Mhm.
So it's a particular, I'm sure you can relate to this in a lot of ways, Julie. It's like it's just such a particular kind of grief when you lose a child, where it's like almost like people just think they're replaceable, or there's some really, right, I don't know, and they're not.
No, no.
And so I was very fortunate because I have heard others in the pregnancy loss experience where they've had people tell them that even right away, even when they're in the hospital still. And that was not my experience for the most part. There were things that happened, but thankfully I had some really, really good people around me. And once I was taken off the ventilator and I was starting to, I had to learn how to eat again, drink again, walk again. So, and I was still very sick. And so I was on dialysis to bring my kidneys back, and I was still recovering my liver. And just basically what happened was because of all the bleeding, I had lost my function to my organs, my key organs, which is why they gave me less than 1% to live.
Wow.
And so going through that, I started to notice, like, to my spirit guides credit, right? Like this, you can look at this two ways, Melinda. You can say, this is hard and my life is terrible and I'm never going to get through this. Or you can say, thankfully for my spirit guide, this is an experience. Every time I start to get a little bit more well, I'm going to celebrate. And what does this actually mean, like more on an energetic and spiritual level, when my body does start to go through a healing process? And that was the piece that I said, I need to know more. I need to know more about how my body functions. I need to know more about how our anatomy works. I'm going to become a nurse.
Ah. So when did you make that decision to become a nurse? Because like give us a little bit of a time perspective. Like you had this horrific, experience with dying, your son passing. When did this realization that your soul called you forward to
Mhm.
study nursing?
Yeah, I was still in the hospital. I was still in the
Wow.
ICU.
Okay. I'm glad I asked that question because I'm thinking like 6, 7 months down the road. That's that's incredible.
Yeah, I obviously it took a while till I could actually enter nursing school because
All
nursing
right.
school is quite rigorous. Even with my science background, it's quite rigorous. It's just really, there's a lot of physical aspects to it. There's a lot of, emotional aspects to it, mental aspects to it. And, obviously you have to learn a lot of things. And so, yeah, it took a good year until I could really physically get to that point where I could start thinking about it again. But it was right away. It was right away. When I received that message, the wisdom is in the body. You're going to go through this challenging experience. You can look at it kind of those two ways, but I'm telling you right now, this is a spiritual experience. Take it for what it is. And then it was like, I need to know more. I'm going to become a nurse and I'm going to look at everything through this lens. And that's kind of how I led down the path of becoming more of an intuitive in that space, is because as I opened those books and I cracked open all of the things and the cellular, how how our cells function and how our organs function, how our systems function, how our nervous system is really like a gateway to psychic energy, because we know things in our body long before we even experience them in our senses. And that was becoming more and more clear to me. And yeah, I had some of my fellow nursing students were like, she's a little crazy, right? But the friends of mine who did embrace me in this, and obviously I can separate it out and say, okay, I'm focusing on the very medical here, and every once in a while, like I'm secretly seeing like okay, we're moving channels of energy around, we're energy, which, right, we are starting to understand more and more and more about how our body is not just a machine. It is a spiritual, it is an energetic, it is a um, neuronal experience, right? And that was what I was having kind of on the side as well. I was going through this and kind of focusing on the practical methodology of what I needed to know.
Mm.
But it just really awakened me to that more. And then I understood too about um, as I got more awareness and more knowledge, I started to open my chart and look at all of the things that my body had gone through. And then I wanted to know more too about what had happened, um, and why this happened. And it allowed me that perspective because I think so many of us, even if we're highly educated and highly aware or highly have a wealth of knowledge, when it comes to our bodies, there just isn't, like, a lot of us don't really take the time to study or don't really know. It's not really part of our curriculum in schools. And so we really don't even know when we're in these settings, we don't even really know what's happening to us or why or what to ask for or what to advocate for. And I just kept getting that message, like, I would have had no idea. And I'm a scientist, and I would have had no idea what any of this meant that's written down in my chart, if I hadn't gone through nursing school and through medicals, through that medical study. And so I felt like that was part of my calling too, was in my work that I do currently, with helping people understand that spiritual side of their body and what it can awaken you to. It's also like learning about the actual processes that are happening within, because that is that is a true awakening. That is a true awakening, and it's power and it's energy and it's once you start to become more aware of who we are as in this human experience, you can't ignore how we are as conscious spiritual beings that will ultimately move on into another experience.
Mm. Oh, and I just can't help thinking like you are so unique in this space because I feel like and I'm making a generalization, but I feel like in this space of near-death experiences, for example, there's such a realization in that space that we are spirit.
Mhm.
Like you had this preconceived idea of what happens after death, and then you had this death experience where you were shown like, okay, this is different than what I anticipated. But I feel like a lot of people in the spiritual space, they focus so much on the spirit,
Mhm.
and it's almost like, you know how some people take care of their cars and some people don't? You know,
Yes.
it's kind of like that. And I'm one of these people that kind of take care of my car, but kind of don't. Um, but it's kind of that space. It's like everybody in the spiritual space, not everybody, too general, but a lot of people in the spiritual space just feel like, okay, I'm spirit having an earthly experience, and this body is just this car that I'm driving around.
Mhm.
And they're not really connecting that there's wisdom in the body. Um, and yeah, so I'm just immensely curious about that because I think there's wisdom in what you're saying, and so I'm wondering from like a ground level, in short snippets, which is hard to do. What are some of the things that we can do to make that connection? And I'll just share one other thought because so often I've had this thought as I've worked with people about that relationship between our spirit and our body and how important it is for us to create the relationship, to nurture that relationship. And I don't think it's always easy in our culture to do that.
First of all, thank you for doing that work because that is the work, right? We may be here for one more minute, we may be here for 50 more years. We really don't know. And so we are in this experience, right? I love the car metaphor, and here's why. So you can drive kind of zoned out on the highway, right? And just sort of miss the trees, the mountains, the things, and you can just be kind of zoned out and you can, kind of just, oh, somehow I'm at the gas station again, right? We can get into that space, especially as experienced drivers, where it's like you just kind of get into go mode. Or you can start to notice what's around you. You can start to deepen into like, I am, I see trees, I see mountains, I see this car in front of me, like I see, and it's that color is really beautiful, right? And so it's kind of like that with our body, like that metaphor of the spirit. We can go through our lives just really focus on that spirit and move through it just fine because the spirit ultimately is the consciousness that is love that you're describing. And I do, it does continue on. Or you can start to notice like the parts of us, our being, our body, our human experience, each of us have a very unique experience, right? What that looks like, what that feels like, how it expresses in the day to day, you can start to notice that and really like go, oh, that's interesting. Why does that happen the way that it does? Why does that look the way that it does? Why does Colorado have a mountain range and Arizona's has saguaro cacti, right? Like you can start to like get a little more curious about your body and then start to ask questions like, why does that work the way that it does? And that's like your doorway. Because once you say, oh, that's interesting, you will kind of want to know more. And then you realize how flippin' amazing that is. It's amazing to live in Colorado and see the Rocky Mountains. It's amazing to be in Arizona and see saguaro cactuses, right? And you start to zone out less and you start to focus in on like, wow, I have this being that is my body. That yes, I'm ultimately a spirit, but I have this being that is my body that's a tool for all of the things. And I can kind of start to build a relationship with it and start to learn more about it and get curious and like see its spirituality in itself. Or I can just kind of just keep driving along.
Mm.
And I there are so many ways to really start this process, and I'm sure that you have some ideas as well, but for me, of course, like the where Oak comes back into this story is because he's, nested in a hammock in my heart. And so even just feeling my heartbeat throughout the day, most of the day I don't even notice it. Right? I just go on doing my thing. But if I sit and I start to feel it thumping through my chest, I go, oh, that is energy. That is spirit. That is energy moving through our cells to keep our heart pumping. And it's pushing blood throughout our system. And what is blood doing? Blood is both nourishing our cells and our organs and our systems, and it's fighting off things that we don't need. This is all happening at this very moment while we're sitting here.
It always amazes me when I think about, we need our heart to beat. If it stops beating, we know what happens. We need to breathe, and we know what happens if we don't breathe. When I really focus on that, it's like we have this understanding of how fragile life is and how miraculous it is from moment to moment. Like every moment. If you're listening to this right now, your heart is beating and you're breathing. Like that's a given. We know that because you wouldn't be listening to this if that wasn't happening. And it's so miraculous. And
Mhm.
sometimes me included, like I get frustrated with the things that aren't working in my body instead of going, oh my gosh, I am breathing, my heart is beating. Look at the good, I can use my hands. I can write, I can, yeah, it really is miraculous. I, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I would love for you to share just a little bit about what that, because here we are 11 years later.
Mhm.
And this will air probably a month from now. And so we're recording this on March 7th, 2025. So I want to acknowledge that date. I want to acknowledge that date and in that acknowledge Oak and his life and his the miracle that he brought into your life. Um, but I would love to hear just a little bit about, you didn't go from that day to here without a lot of work and not only physical, but emotional, just every way. What was that like for you to, I mean, that's a stark contrast between being in heaven and having these really painful earthly experiences. What was that like for you to make that, to go through that journey of transformation, transcending actually?
Thank you. I appreciate this question a lot. And particularly because I have worked in the pregnancy loss space as a volunteer. And, when I share that Oak is in my heart and he's with me and we're loved, that does not at all take away from the grief,
Um,
from the human experience of grief and how challenging that is. And what happened for me in particular, that those two things happened in parallel. It was like, I know he's okay. He's here. I feel him in my heart beating, and I want him here. Like, why did
mm,
he die? And I went through that really. Sometimes it was rather dark where I just didn't even know. I couldn't even wake up, and I kept thinking, but I have this awareness. I had this spiritual. And so my advice to others is just, it's okay to hold both. And sometimes one of those pieces of us is going to show up just a little more. It doesn't take away from the other piece. They're just both there, right? And we can hold them both. And sometimes, like, depending on, the day, or, when I see oak leaves out, right? When I'm walking, sometimes I'm just so happy to see him, and sometimes it brings great sadness.
mm,
And that's just how it's showing up. And so I just want to share that it's okay to hold both of those things and to honor your grief experience and to hear a near death experience and hear how great it is on the other side, but still care about, to still want your grandma who recently passed to still be here, right? That
mm,
doesn't take away from that. In fact, it just adds to the love experience that is on the other side. We love these people that have been in our lives, your children, my grandmother, my spirit beings, my pets. We love them so deeply. And it's hard when we lose them, no matter what the other side looks like.
yeah,
And it's okay to hold that we know that they're okay, and that we also like miss them a lot.
yeah. Beautifully said. Um, One doesn't discount the other. It informs the other, but it doesn't
Yes,
discount it. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Beautifully said. I had another question, and that was, on the other side, you like experience, and you mentioned it more than once, that we are one. You experience that oneness, and I hear a lot of people talking about that oneness. I'm wondering how you experience that here. On the other side, like we're in the spirit realm, and so I imagine it's a different experience, right? Because it's just like when it's like when we have experiences here where we feel in sync with somebody. Like even
Mhm.
before we hit record, amazing experience with you that just kind of dropped in, which, that really was so beautiful, where I just felt this connection and I just felt like we've been here before. It was really powerful and unusual, but I'm just wondering, how do you how do you integrate, or how do you practice, or do you the idea that we are all one, while in this life it feels very separate?
Well, the separation is a story,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we all start to coalesce around. And I felt that experience too, Julie. And that's just a reminder that we're not separate. We are one. And I know there are people who have visions of things that happen on the other side of the world, or people know that their child's in trouble before their child even calls them, right? If they're living, they're in their 20s or something and they're living somewhere else. They're that energy, that energy of our consciousness is one. And we might be separated, or at least perceiving us through the stories that we've been told, that we're separate because we have a body, right? And the what my understanding from that is that because our bodies do perform similar functions on the inside, and yes, there can be variations of that are also beautiful. But the to your point, like the breath, heart beating, right? There's like some of these very grounding pieces of our bodies that are the reminders that we are all one.
Mm,
If you sit in a room with a bunch of people taking a deep breath in, deep breath out at the same time, there's no separation. You are starting to feel that. And at the same time, we can, as part of living in this human experience, because it's not easy, it is definitely not easy. And we come against challenges all the time. We can put up energetic barriers, and that's just one of the gifts that we have. And so, yes, we're connected. Yes, we're love. Yes, we are connected through processes in the body in this human experience. And because life is challenging and this human experience it just is what it is, we have the ability to put up our energetic boundaries. But what we don't want to do is over perceive that as being that we are separate, because we're not.
mm. Um, I do want to ask you something I ask all my guests, and you mentioned in your experience, like experiencing the power of prayer, seeing that orange light, experiencing prayer as this orange light. And I think that's a good reminder to us that, as we are connected as one, and as we perceive, loved ones struggling, that we can send that beautiful orange light of prayer to out to assist in a as part of the way that we can assist. But I'm wondering, what are some of the spiritual practices that you practice on a daily or weekly basis that help you continue to feel connected?
Mm, great question. I love that. Meditation every morning, yoga most days when I can go to yoga. And actually, in fact, yoga is unioning spirit, mind, and body. That's what yoga means,
Mm,
or translates to in English. And that was a key component in why they think I survived, actually, was because I had been practicing yoga before. And when you practice yoga, you really get strong cardiovascularly, even though it doesn't necessarily seem that way because you're not running or biking. And so that was one of the reasons they thought perhaps that was one of the reasons why medically I survived. But also, I've been getting more interested in exploring the dream space.
mm,
The dream space is a connector for us, and it can actually be a place for our loved ones to visit us here in this life. And so I've had visits from my dad, who passed away a couple of years ago. I've had visits from him in the dream space where he's been whole and healthy and just told me how much he loves me. So the dream space keeps me very connected. And walking, nature, just and being around, of course, oak trees, receiving messages from him. Um, so yeah, those are just some of them, but I am always open to exploring more too. I do appreciate a good crystal as well, and I like to get crystals that have healing properties for like parts of my body that might be showing up. Um, either saying I'm a little tight here or I need some extra love here, and I might call in some of those crystals as well. So yeah, yeah, but I'm always interested in learning more too.
Wonderful. And share where people can connect with you. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me at intunewithmelinda.com or on Instagram, Substack, YouTube at Intune with Melinda. And yeah, I will most likely be at IANS again this year for any of you who are going to IANS. I don't know in what capacity quite yet, but so yeah, that's the International Association for Near Death Studies conference. And we also just started a local Northern Colorado IANS group. So anybody who's local to Northern Colorado that wants to know more about near-death experiences or spiritually transformative experiences can attend that group. You can find that group on Meetup. So
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing this unique day with us. And I want to acknowledge your son Oak here with us today too, because he's definitely been here with us today. So I want to acknowledge his presence, and thank you so much for being here, Melinda.
thank you, Julie. It's been an honor.